I'm John Gormley. Welcome to this hour of the radio program, and thanks for checking in wherever we find you on this day. Well, it is time again for something that we do on a regular basis here, pretty close to once a month. It's called Ask the Premier, and this is where Premier Brad Wall joins us. He will often be on the phone if he is traveling, if he's at his home base in Swift Current. He will join us in studio as well from time to time. It is a full hour of radio where you ask the Premier. Now, there might be a specific question. Often it will be a question so specific the Premier isn't walking around at the top of his mind with the status of a certain road repair in a certain community or an individual issue that you've raised. But often it's a good opportunity on government policy as well to fire a question, what's happening? Or if you do have one of those specific questions, the Premier will often take it away and report back later. So it is your chance now on Ask the Premier, and I'll make sure you get on the phones now. I've got a number of questions. We'll start with that, and then we'll get to the calls. 1-877-332-8255. Make sure you are here to chat with Premier Brad Wall. Premier, welcome back, and thanks for joining us.
John, thank you.
Okay, fall time. Sitting in the House starts...
next Wednesday.
Okay.
Next Wednesday, the House resumes with a speech from the throne.
Anything in terms of where the government sees itself now that is evolving? I think specifically, and I wanted to start on this one, the price of oil. We're seeing oil much lower than in recent years. Does that pose a problem for government revenues?
Well, it can. We have, in the first quarter report, we noted that we were in, the surplus was a little bit bigger than we had forecast because oil had been higher. It had been well over $100 and had been in the $100 range for about 6 months, the first 6 months of the budget year. So that meant that we were a bit ahead, even though potash was a little bit off, and our projections looked reasonably accurate with about a $15 million boost to the forecasted surplus. You know, that could change if we see a protracted period of time of oil at, it's at $82, $83 West Texas right now. Here's something to remember, though, John. There's a bit of an offset. In Canada, because we're a major oil producer, our dollar is tied often to the price of oil. And people will note that when the oil price is falling down, our dollar is falling down. That's actually bad if you're traveling to the States, good if you're budgeting in a province that exports still most of its products to the United States because we get paid in U.S. dollars. For every penny the Canadian dollar falls against the U.S. dollar, it generates $30 million more to the provincial treasury. For every dollar of West Texas intermediate decline, there's a $20 million cost. So you can see the offset there. In fact, if on a given day we lost a penny off the dollar and a dollar off of West Texas, we'd actually still be money ahead. That ratio's not really been keeping pace lately. Right. But there's a bit of a balance there. Not only that, but we are increasingly more diversified. We see significant revenues coming in from general taxes now. Our manufacturing sector has done very, very well. Wholesale trade is up. You see some real hope on the uranium side of things. We can talk a little bit about that later, perhaps. So as a more diversified economy, we can withstand it. But the bottom line is we will watch the budget very carefully. It is balanced today. We intend to keep the balanced budget advantage. And so if we have to make adjustments, we'll make those adjustments as we go through this year and watch the price of oil.
Premier Brad Wall with us. This is Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Population increases. You've been on a run, both in terms of economic growth and population, that has essentially spanned your entire time as Premier in the last 7 years. You get a feeling sometimes in the economy that different sectors will soften a little. You'll see real estate up, real estate down. The last jobless numbers left me amazed because overall jobs, month to month, there were 7,000 new jobs. Now, I didn't get where they came from. Most were full-time. But in terms of sectors, the political critics say, well, I think it was social workers and some other government employees, you had fewer of. But where is the job growth right now when you're hearing in some of the resource sectors, like the metal fabricating people, they're saying it's a bit slower now. So what's happening?
Well, it's a combination of sectors that are involved. We see, for example, in a few job reports in a row, and they happen on a monthly basis, the first Friday of the month. We noted that our overall net new jobs were on the increase, but our natural resource jobs, related jobs, were declining. And so you quickly look to answer this question you've just asked: what sectors then are responsible for the growth? And you do find it in manufacturing. You find it on the innovation side, which is hopeful. And that would be a lot of things that are happening right in this city, in Saskatoon at the U of S, but also at the U of R. You'll find it on the wholesale trade, financial, and also on the financial services side. The year-over-year numbers surprised me too, John. You talked about month to month. 19,300 new jobs last month versus the year before, over the year. That's remarkable growth for an economy that the economists are saying is growing at somewhere around 2% or less in terms of GDP. So it speaks to diversification. But we can't get complacent. It's why you might see in the speech from the throne some innovative new growth tax incentives, especially for export-oriented businesses, to create new corporate office or value-added jobs here in the province. We can't be complacent, because growth is the only thing that will pay for quality of life, or, for example, a bridge in Prince Albert, or new infrastructure projects across the province.
Premier Brad Wallace here. This is Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. I have a ton of questions on my list, but of course, this is your chance to go to the Premier of Saskatchewan with your queries, anything on your mind. Let's get you on the radio now. Clinton Regina, thanks for hanging on. You're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for having me. Premier Wall, my questions focus primarily around the Crown corporations, and I'm not a moderate on this by any means, but I'm wondering where we're at as a province as far as getting less government in the economy. And I know it's a sensitive topic, but I feel like the Sask Party government's taken their foot off the gas a little bit as far as SLGA privatization, the Crown's, as far as SaskTels and SGI being monopolies, and why they have marketing departments, the quality of our highways. And I applaud you for your lean management practice work in the healthcare. And I know that your government spared a lot of senior-ranking pro-labor Crown execs. I'm just wondering if we have lost some momentum in trending towards more of a private market in some of those areas. I'll just hang up and listen to your answer. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks very much for the call and for the question. I want to be very clear here. In two different elections, we have committed to the people of the province that we would not be privatizing the Crown corporations, and that we would not be selling existing liquor stores. So what we're doing right now with liquor in terms of private retailers is still consistent with that promise. In other words, we've said, because Saskatchewan's growing, there's a need for new stores in growing neighborhoods, and we've said we'll not spend another public dollar on any bricks and mortar for a liquor store when we need to build highways, schools, and hospitals. We'll let the private sector do that, and we'll have a discussion in Saskatchewan about whether we should go further. And if we do go further, well, we'll campaign on that first. I'm a strong believer, John, in governments campaigning for a mandate. We said we wouldn't privatize these Crowns. We made a solemn commitment to the people of the province. We're going to keep it. The only way that will change is if we campaign on something else. That's just how I think we should operate. We've tried to keep the promises we've made. Keep the promises on things we said we would do, but also on those things we said we wouldn't do. To Clint's question, in terms of what I'd call sort of a free enterprise agenda around growth, record tax reduction on property and personal income tax side, small business tax reductions, 44% less operating debt. We've paid billions of dollars of operating debt off for the province. Two different rounds of important labor legislative reform that contribute, I think, to a positive business climate in the province. 15% less full-time equivalents or full-time positions in government. We have shrunk government in favor of what we believe is the sector that will create long-term prosperity and jobs for the province, and that's the private sector. So these are important things to remember in context of the question we just had.
But you did on this show a number of months ago get a lot of people talking when you said you wanted a discussion on the future of SLGA. I mean, yes, you haven't broken away from a commitment because it's only new stores, but I think a lot of people look at the idea of the government being in the retail sales of liquor in general. Where's that discussion going?
Well, you're going to hear in this session of the legislature, and it may well be referenced in the speech from the throne, but you'll see the minister, Don McMorris, will present a paper based on things we've heard from people after we asked for that discussion. You're right, on your show, that's where it sort of started. And we'll report back on what we've heard. We'll sort of have the next round, because I think we've been able to discern a number of different options in terms of that feedback. We can present those back to folks, and we have some time before we develop our own campaign platform. The next election will be spring of 2016, unless the federal government goes a bit earlier, and then we might go back to our original date in the fall. But we'll have a platform plank with respect to liquor retailing, and people will be able to make their decision in the campaign.
Premier Brad Wall is here. This is Ask the Premier. I'm John Gormley. We get to your calls from healthcare to school buses to northern tourism and more. This is your chance to put your questions to Premier Wall here on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wall is here. This is Ask the Premier. Hey, let's do it this way. You ask some questions, and I have a long list of questions as well. I will ask questions of the Premier, but the key is to get as many of your calls on the radio as we can fit. So let's do that now. Andrea in Caravale, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Hello, Premier Brad Wall. My question is about busing situation in our area. We are short bus drivers and have to drive our children. It has been like this for a few years, and the school division has had lots of time to do something about it. We have complained to the Minister of Education, and no one has provided a solution. We and our rural neighbors pay a lot of school taxes. Does this not cover transportation services in southeast Saskatchewan? We are being compensated for driving, but it's not very much with the price of fuel, and only if we apply for it. What is your solution for dealing with this, and also bus safety? Our children ride on buses that don't have any kind of GPS and no seatbelt.
Andrea, thanks very much for the call. Well, firstly, there is a role for government in general in education, of course, a big role for the provincial government. That's why we've increased the operating budgets for school divisions well over 20%, mostly around 25% over the last number of years. We've also increased school capital, but certainly the busing situation in southeast Saskatchewan is known to the government, and I know it's known to the school division there, and that doesn't necessarily help Andrea with the challenge that she has or other parents have. The problem, of course, is a labor shortage. The problem is recruiting people to do this sort of work, and so from a government's perspective, we've been working hard to recruit people back to the province, whether they're expatriates who've left for other parts of Canada, or even newcomers. Certainly, we need to continue to grow the population. In southeast Saskatchewan, it's full employment. It's negative unemployment, if that makes sense, and I think folks who live there will understand that there's a shortage, and there's no quick solution to it. But I think the ministry is involved in working with the school division on hopefully some innovative ideas to recruit people into those important roles.
Okay, when you talk about at an institution or a structural level, more jobs than there are people in areas like the Southeast and elsewhere, this whole temporary foreign worker program, the feds have effectively killed it. This $1,000 for each labor market opinion, or whatever they call it now. Employers tell me in the service sector, for example, you just can't do it. So what is the level of dealing with the federal government on this that you're at now?
You know, when I had a chance to talk to the new Premier of Alberta, Jim Prentice, shortly after his election as leader of the party, and then, of course, he became Premier, we talked about this. This is a big issue in Saskatchewan and Alberta where we have a labor shortage. There's some facts that need to be on the table here with respect to the temporary foreign worker program, John. Namely, last year, 50% of those that were previously temporary foreign workers became permanent residents. We'd like the number to be higher, but that's pretty significant. The name of this program itself works against it. I mean, it's hard for anyone to rally around or start a parade for the temporary foreign worker program. So we need to get facts on the table about how many of these folks become permanent residents, folks that we need and welcome here in the province. And this is a challenge. We want some flexibility from the federal government. We've said that to Minister Kenney and Minister Alexander federally, to the Prime, said it to the Prime Minister. because we do want to make sure Canadians first in all available jobs, but we need to make sure that we're dealing with the labor shortage in a meaningful way and encouraging anyone who is here temporarily to become a permanent resident.
Now, on the provincial immigrant nominee program, though, do you have the flexibility there, or do you need more people, more nominating ability?
It's hard for us to complain about how many nominees we've been getting, because as the federal government has increased the cap for the number of provincial nominees, Saskatchewan's been doing better, and I think partly it's because of the case we could make economically, and as a government we have made to the federal government. So, for example, last year we got an increase of roughly 14% of all the new nominees in Canada we got here in the province, even though we're only 3% of the population. That's a recognition. I think we want to give the federal government credit for making that we have extraordinary needs, and we're going to continue to work on that. We're at 4,725 nominees now approved year in and year out. We want to get to 6,000.
Premier Brad Wall is here. This is Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Johnny in Weyburn, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Mr. Premier, I have a quick question. I just wonder if there's any checks or balances in place about contractors that are hired to build the care homes and the hospitals in the southeast here, especially like Tattagua and Radville, where, believe me, the workmanship is subpar.
Johnny, thanks for the call. I'm not aware of any particular concerns with respect to those two facilities. There is a fairly diligent process in place by the health region and even in the Ministry of Health. There's a capital division where quality control is a top priority, especially when we're talking about healthcare facilities. So, I know the health minister knows that area very well. He's the MLA for Weyburn Big Muddy. Mm-hmm. I'm sure, Johnny, he'll want to check into these two things specifically, and I'll ask him to do that. But yeah, there are processes in place. It's reasonably it's a very rigorous process in terms of the inspection, and quality has got to be a top priority because, as we've said, these are healthcare facilities.
1-877-332-8255. You name it. We talk about it here on Ask the Premier. Okay, I'm going through the list of people. Trevor in Regina, who's been hanging on. Trevor, you have a health issue with the Premier.
Hi, I'd just like to thank the government of Saskatchewan. For the first time ever, Sask Health is now paying for the cost of craniofacial prosthetics. No previous government has ever done that.
Well, Trevor, thanks very much for the call. This was a decision that the government took, and for good reason. Many would say a little too late, and I sure understand that. But I appreciate the call, and we know there's a lot more work to do in terms of things that are covered and things that are currently not, and we'll make progress as we can.
Premier Brad Wall, we're taking lots of calls, 1-877-332-8255. Any questions you have for the Premier? Let's get them on the radio now. Don in Regina, the question of liquor stores in the province. Question to the Premier.
Hi. I think that opening all new stores as private is just a backdoor privatization. But my question is, you say we're not going to spend a dime on bricks and mortar for new liquor stores. Doesn't that ignore the fact that new liquor stores make more money than they cost? So in not doing that, you're cutting off a perpetual source of funds for the government to use instead of tax dollars for other things.
Okay, Don, what we're going to do is hang on to that question. We will put it straight to the Premier when we get back. This is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wallace here. This is our monthly go of what we call Ask the Premier. 1-877-332-8255. Don in Regina, thanks for hanging on. Okay, your question to the Premier Wall, Don, in summary, is the government should be in the business of retailing liquor. Why?
Well, because Brad Wall says that we're not going to spend any money on bricks and mortar, but the fact is that liquor stores make more money than it costs to build. That's why the private sector is lining up and salivating to build them. So it seems like you're using ideology to cut off a perpetual source of funds that could be used for government expenditures as opposed to tax dollars.
Yeah, unfortunately, the facts don't support Don's case, and we have a good experiment next door in Alberta where the Alberta government moved to complete privatizing in terms of retailing liquor. They saw their revenues increase. They maintained their role as wholesaler and therefore controlled markup and basic distribution. But they saw their revenue to the government increase even after the complete privatization of the stores. Moreover, in our province, even under the NDP, if a store in rural Saskatchewan was kind of having trouble holding its own for overhead reasons, or you name it, in a rural center, under the NDP, and we've done some as well, there's been a conversion to the private sector, and there's not been a loss in revenue as a result of that, because government stores come with their own overhead. Now, we haven't made a final decision about getting out of the retailing completely, but it's part of the discussion we want to have, including Don's comment. And there are those, including in the opposition in the NDP, who think that the government should be the exclusive retailer in terms of current stores, existing stores of liquor. And I think that's a bit offside with where the people of the province are at. And frankly, not supported by the facts in terms of revenue that we can generate from retailing liquor.
This is Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Barry, you have a question on MRIs and healthcare, sir.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. My question is regarding private MRI clinics in the city of Regina. We have one operating now, and the private individual cannot actually use this clinic unless you are going through a WCB claim or SGI claim. I'm on a list, and I will be waiting up to 3 months. I called into this Open Sky Diagnostics, and they could have got me in the last week. I'm willing to pay, sir, and I'm wondering why we cannot access this.
Barry raises a very, very good question. For a while, we've seen, in our government actually has been deploying more MRI units, and we've been seeing a reduction in the wait times for these diagnostics. But 3 months is a long time, and that's what he's just told us his time is. I'm from Swift Current. If someone in one of my constituents wants an MRI, I think there might be a private one in Medicine Hat, because in Alberta they allow this. So that's an hour and 50 minutes, maybe 2 hours to the west. In the same country, the country of Canada, and you can access this MRI procedure and pay for it. This is something we need to look at very carefully in the province. He's from Regina. There's a new Plains Health campus that's been delayed as we repurpose it and make sure it fits with the health system we need in the capital city. Maybe it is time at that health campus that we allow for this kind of procedure. It's something we're going to look at. We allow more private operators on the surgery side. That's why we've seen wait times come down for surgeries. And what we've said there, by the way, to clinics coming in is that you can't rob from the public system in terms of personnel, because that's always been a concern. We have a private system coming in, and aren't they going to rob the nurses and the frontline staff from the public system? Well, we put a barrier there, and that works very well on the surgical side. Can it work on the diagnostic side? These are the questions we're asking now, and I think this is something that deserves consideration, serious consideration, and I thank Barry for the call.
Okay, serious consideration. Are you moving down that road at some point then? Is this something that is now being discussed? Where are you at on the decision?
I will not rule it out, because, when it comes to a choice between prompt diagnostics, prompt surgery, timely surgery, and ideology, the people of this province will choose the diagnostics and the surgery. And that's where we're at in terms of private surgeries happening within the public system. And it's time perhaps for us to open it up on the MRIs, on diagnostics, and allow people in this province to do what they can if they just drive next door to Alberta.
Premier Brad Wallace here. This is Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Chris in Gull Lake, you have a question for the Premier on online gaming.
I'm kind of curious as to why we, in this day and age, we don't allow online poker to be offered here in Saskatchewan. It's currently offered through a website in BC, run through BCLC, and it's also licensed out to Manitoba. I currently have to play overseas. They make money off the rake, like a certain percentage of every pot that's played. And I don't understand why that can't be done here. That's money that every time I play overseas, that's money that will never come back to this province or country. And there is no regulation overseas, no oversight, no nothing. So there's nothing to stop them from cheating me out of my money. And I called BCLC and asked why I can't play here. And they basically told me that I needed to talk to the government here, that it's regulated out and it's not allowed.
Chris, thanks very much for the call. This is something we looked carefully at even in the first term of our government. And when we looked at the government adding this this aspect of gaming. We noted that in the first few years there would be quite an expected loss, and the amount of money to be gained to the treasury, to the people of the province for having online gaming through the government casinos, for example, was not as the business case was not as robust, not as strong or obvious as we would have thought. And I'm not sure we were interested in losing any money at all in the early years in the hopes of making some money later down the line. We have raised this with SIGA. They operate casinos in the province effectively and well, and there may be the opportunity for SIGA to move into this area with us, with the government as a licensing body taking some share of the revenue down the road.
Premier Brad Wall is here. Your questions? Premier Cameron in Martinsville. You're on with Premier Wall, and you have a question on roads.
Yeah. With the south access here in Martinsville, which we have lots of accidents, we brought it down to 90 kilometers an hour, but now we're just going to get rid of the south access and move it down to Lutheran Road because it has the speed-up lanes. It has a longer slow-down lane for you to turn right, but the problem is crossing the highway. If the slow-down lane is against the two other lanes, so now you got 3 lanes. When there's a long lineup of 20, 30 cars in the slowdown lane, you can't see out. So what happens is everybody crosses and accidents happen and everything else. So why are we getting rid of that access and moving it down instead of fixing it properly?
Cameron, no final decisions have been made. It's true that because of the amount of traffic at the interchanges, at the intersections on Highway 11 and 12 around Warman and Martinsville, this has the attention of the government certainly, and we have reduced speed zones, and this might be where we would for example, photo radar has a role to play potentially too. But the long-term solution is improved interchanges, and so right now the ministry is in the process of highways, is in the process of reviewing the final report to look at all of the options here. And I'd encourage Cameron to get a hold of, he's certainly contacted me and will provide his feedback to the ministry, to the Minister of Highways, but he may also want to do the same thing. In this case, it would have the advantage of also being his MLA. Nancy Hepner is the minister, and this is a top priority for her to get this right in terms of this important interchange. Premier
Brad Wall here. More calls ahead. Boy, we everything from the University of Saskatchewan, roadside pullouts and rest areas. More questions ahead. Stand by. This is News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. This is Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Holy cow, where do we go here? This is the usual, we never get all the calls on, but we are going to give it the college try. Let's go to Doug in Pangman. Doug, roadside pullouts, the question?
Good morning, Mr. Premier.
Good morning.
I travel Highway number 1 here between Regina and Alberta pretty well every day, every second day. And in the wintertime, and in serious weather, there is absolutely, outside of Swift Current and Moose Jaw, there is absolutely no place to get your truck off the road if you've got, ice or a serious blizzard. And I'm just wondering if the province is planning on making that a priority, and it's a real safety issue. You travel this road pretty well every day, and in the winter you see them, at least the aftermath of the wrecks that occur during a storm. And I'm just curious as to whether or not the government is planning on doing something about that.
Well, it is an important issue, and you're right. I drive that highway, especially when the session's on, pretty much twice a day, there to Regina and then back home to Swift Current. And there are many other highways where you can make the same case. I can tell you that despite record budgets in highways, and we have another record budget in this year, a record expenditure in highways, there's so much work to be done in terms of thin membrane surfaces, so many roads that need proper repair, that still need proper repair, notwithstanding all the money that's been spent. We know the importance of twinning on 39 and 6. We've scheduled those. That's underway. Highway 7 from Saskatoon to Delisle, passing lanes in the Regina area, and now also in number 7. These are all major capital expenditures, and so I can't say today that these sorts of rest areas will be a top priority, because there's still a lot of work to catch up on just to get our roads to the point where they're in better shape. But I understand the importance of it, and our MLAs have been talking about the issue as well.
Let's get back to the calls. Bonnie and Wadena. Bonnie, you have a question on health care. Hey, Bonnie.
Yeah, good morning.
Bonnie, you're on the radio. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I just wondered regarding the Ebola that's been discovered in the States. I'm a frontline health worker, and there's been 2 frontline health workers already infected. There's a 3-week incubation period. It's only a matter of time before it gets to our country, and I wondered what Saskatchewan is doing to prepare for this.
Thanks very much for the call, Bonnie. And there's no question about it that this is a top priority for government, for the Ministry of Health. I think the Minister of Health, our Minister of Health, was on a conference call with all of Canada's Ministers of Health yesterday, including the Federal Minister of Health, Rona Ambrose, to highlight exactly what has been done already in our country, what can be done in our country and in our provinces to prepare us for Ebola. And, I can tell you that even this morning, the ministry had conversations with provider unions, for example, and those who represent healthcare workers to talk a little bit about protocols, about being prepared, and that work continues. We have hospitals now in the tertiary centers in Regina and Saskatoon that would be prepared for this sort of a situation, and the logistics plan to get patients, should anyone present with Ebola, to these places is also there. So it's a top priority for I think, well, frankly, the provinces right across the country, for Canadians as a whole. We ought not to be sanguine about it or think that this can't happen here. We need to be prepared, and that's exactly what we're working hard to do.
Premier Brad Wall. Okay, let's do some short snappers, ones that I had on my list.
That means my answer's got to be shorter.
Yeah, that's true.
All right,
Photo radar.
Fair enough.
You going to make friends on photo radar?
It's not about making friends. It works. We've looked at what happened in Winnipeg. We've seen fatalities down, collisions down. We've looked at the same thing in British Columbia, where they use the facts speak to the notion that these these photo radars work. And that's why they're in place. And we had a competitive process to contract the company that's doing the work now. And strangely enough, the New Democrats, who now oppose this apparently, or at least oppose the company, voted in favor of the radars in the Traffic Safety Committee work that was done last year in Saskatchewan.
Smart meters. SaskPower, is this a problem now that you are changing or switching back and still looking for other smart meters in future? How does SaskPower get through this? Well,
the arrangement with Census is that the taxpayers, the shareholders of SaskPower, would be kept whole in all of this. The loss was anticipated to be $47 million, and you'll know we have an agreement for them with Census now to make sure that we recover the $47 million.
Okay, your voice is going.
Excuse me. But let me just break that down a little bit. Pardon me, John. So we get a refund on the meters that are happening already. We also get a credit. But in case they cannot develop a meter to specifications that a third party can verify will work safely in the province, we get all the money back. And they're having to invest in the innovation to bring those meters up to speed. So this thing has been addressed, and there's measures in place to make sure that A, people are safe, and B, that no money is lost by SaskPower.
Premier Brad Wall, a couple more questions from me real fast. We'll try to get a caller on. Saskatoon's transit strike or transit lockout moves into the 1 month period. Does the province have a role in a city transit labor dispute?
You know, it's a difficult situation. We want the matter to be resolved through collective bargaining, through the processes that are in place. And as a government, we're loath to interfere in another employer's workplace difficulties. And so our position has not changed on that as of yet.
Let's go to Stu in Regina. Stu, you have a question that's political, federal, provincial.
Yes, I do. It's possible after the next federal election that we could be looking at a Liberal majority government under Justin Trudeau with no seats west of Thunder Bay. This happened in 1980 under his father, and Pierre Trudeau extracted his revenge on the people of Western Canada for not supporting him by bringing in the national energy policy. So my question to Premier Wall, if this should happen again, what, if anything, can you do to protect the people of Saskatchewan and by extension Western Canada, since your political party does not have a federal affiliate, to protect the people of the West from blatantly unfair federal legislation?
Wow, that's a question. I've been counseled by people to never answer hypothetical questions in politics, and so I won't, except in a general sense to say we're the Saskatchewan Party, and I think it's our job to represent Saskatchewan's interests regardless of who the federal government is, to fight for those interests nationally. We're going to continue to do exactly that regardless of who's in power in Ottawa.
Premier, good having you by. I know House comes back next week. See you in a month's time.
Absolutely, John. Thanks.
This is Ask the Premier every single month. Premier Brad Wall and you. Okay, I left 3 callers hanging on. Thank you, everyone. We got through a lot of calls today. This is News Talk Radio.